Welcome back to the Forbidden Mountain. Today we are going to be focusing on questions from the Discord. Lots of different types of questions about Rise of the Floodborn, the financial side of it, the non-financial side of it, and some interesting questions kind of weaved in and out. So how are you doing today, Scott?
Good. Excited. Less than a week away.
Less than a week away and like 50-ish cards left to be spoiled. So
Yeah.
we have a pretty good idea of what Rise is like. Obviously there's still 50 cards left, and I'm sure 5 of them are going to be bananas.
Right. Right. Right.
But you know, you can't get everything at once, which I guess is the point, the important thing. With that, let's get into the questions. We're going to start with our good friend Jay Cortez 06. How many sets need to come out until a mono ink deck is competitive? I think like just really simple. It doesn't matter how many sets come out. It just matters if there's ever any payoff to doing it, right?
Yep.
So since that's like the option, what type of like design or cards will we need for like a payoff for that like to really matter?
So I only remember from a card game I played briefly, which was um the Epic TCG had a mechanic that basically said like when you play this card, if you can reveal two cards of the same color in this situation, like you had to reveal two cards of the color when you played the card. So they were like overpowered for there's really no cost in that game, but like overpowered for what they did. But you
Right,
had to basically have in your hand other cards of that same color to play them. So
right,
mechanics like that like you can't even play a card unless you do things like that, or if there was like you know Crusade slash Bad Moon type, all your XYZ color characters get +1/+1 or something like that. Like there would be those types of effects. But yeah, you need that payoff. Like I've seen I don't know if it's trolling, but I've seen like people on Twitter like want to make monocolor decks, and I'm just like, there's really no point.
yeah.
There's no reason to there's absolutely no payoff. There's no like there's no reason to at all. Like you will always get something by diversifying into another color, even if you think that the ink is like complete, which is not true. So like
Right.
there's no way that you wouldn't pick up something from adding another color to your deck.
So the only other game I can think of is Magic the Gathering having the mechanic Devotion. And Devotion was like when you play this, you count like the color symbols on cards.
Okay.
So you could do something similar like that, where it's like when this enters play, like if you have 5 Sapphire characters, do X.
Right. Right.
So that's like another version I could see for the payoff. But the same thing, like you said, like revealing cards from your hand, or like even like flipping the top card of your deck.
Sure. Sure.
So there's plenty of ways to like make it happen, but right now it's like you said, like I'm not gonna play an all Sapphire deck when I could like just by playing friends on the other side, my deck is better, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
so
Right.
it's like there's just not really a reason for it, but in the end, I think when they want it to happen, it won't be very difficult to make it happen.
Totally agree.
Um, so the next question's from our friend Clayton. Clayton asks, can Chapter 1 decks be viable without Rise of the Floodborn upgrades? So this is like, for me, kind of like a budget question of, let's just say, you and I, we have an
Mhm.
event literally next Saturday, right?
Yep.
So like
Mhm.
next Saturday with Rise of the Floodborn legal, if we weren't capable of getting our hands on Rise of the Floodborn right away, what deck would you just innately pick up and play?
I mean, I would just continue to play whatever I was comfortable with in chapter one. So it would just be like I've been running a lot of uh Amber Ruby, for example. So I would just continue to run that. But I mean, the one thing I will say is like I built that deck to be exist in a chapter one meta. So if I really felt like on day one, I was surrounded by other people that somehow had more product and it was a completely it's not a different meta, but at least there's different options. You may be just showing up with something that is targeting the wrong things.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's not viable. Like a card is a card, and a lot of the chapter 1 stuff is still, even seeing the cards that have been revealed so far. Like a lot of the chapter 1 stuff is still the most powerful stuff you can be doing in slot, if not in the game period. So there's like, I still think decks will, by definition, probably be 50% at minimum chapter 1 to begin with, if not more. Just the way the game is usually built, it's usually heavily with the earliest stuff first, because they want to put it in the in the initial set. So in my opinion, it's completely viable. It's just, can old decks be upgraded? Probably.
Yeah.
But I also think that's where a lot of people will start, to be honest with you.
Right.
They'll just say, like, here's the cards I like out of the set. They fit right into whatever I was playing before.
Right. So it's always an interesting mindset just for the building, right? Like, yes, you can show up, and I'm sure that Amber Steel is still good, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm sure, insert aggro deck here is still good.
Mhm.
Specifically, the aggro decks, like, is where I would be more lenient towards, because everyone's trying to mess around and like fill out these control combo mid-range decks and figuring out everything out. So if you had to do it, I would definitely lean towards the more aggressive versions of things,
Sure.
just because you want to pressure your opponent and like put them on edge even further, as they're learning a new deck, and B, they're trying to, like, their deck is definitely incomplete because it's so early on. But like by nature, no, I don't think it's viable. Like, like, what I'm saying? Like there's definitely enough better cards in Rise to replace even like like within the decks that I'm talking about. So
Mhm.
yes, you can do it, but you also have to understand that like that comes with its own problems.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
all right, next question comes from Ryan. With people who are still on the fence trying out Lorcana, is it possible to create an inexpensive and, most importantly, easy obtainable deck? I mean, the starter decks are just fine, right? Like,
Mhm.
like all of
Yeah.
those colors they're fine. Like, you can play any of those decks. I think. I mean, for the most part, like, aside from like Amber or Amethyst, really didn't have much success in the game. Like, it was had like one or two of them in the top 8 early on, but after that it kind of just fell off. But like the other colors had success throughout, all of chapter 1 metagame. So it's the same thing here. Like, if you can just pick up a couple starter decks and just say, hey, like, if you just want to play the game, right? Like, if you
Mhm.
just want to play the game, the starter decks are fine. Like,
Yeah.
that's what they're there for. That's what they're designed for. You don't need to go crazy out of your way. I don't know. I just think that you just buy some starter decks and move on with life, or just buy a bunch of commons and uncommons and even some of the cheap rares. I mean, the Emerald Amethyst deck is still very cheap. If you don't want to go all in and like buy Cusco's and stuff and like buy John Silver's, then just don't. Like, just hand them this deck and say, here you go. Like, here's the deck, and if you like
Yeah.
it, these are the steps for buying the next sections, right?
I think if you're going to build a deck, though, for players that want to understand the difference between Lorcana and other things, I would just make sure that whatever kind of like test decks you're building, even if they're mostly commons and uncommons, they include some type of shift character
Hmm.
and then some variety of songs. Because to me, in chapter 1 especially, like, for a player that's not used to directly combating your opponent's challenging directly, or the lore mechanic versus, like, life loss type thing in other games, it, other than those basic things that exist in the game, I would say, like, from a even from like other games that have used similar mechanics, I would say the biggest change is that I've noticed is shift characters and songs. And they have I mean, they have some play in other games, but I would say, as a consistent mechanic that exists within the game and is built upon as the game keeps progressing, like, I would say, for any new player, just include them so they understand those subtle differences between this game and other games.
Yeah, I mean, for teaching purposes, absolutely. Just just throwing everything possible within 2 decks to cover as many grounds as possible is always helpful. Although it's weird because, like, in this game, I'm not even sure it's really possible because certain keywords don't hit certain deck in
Sure. Yeah,
combinations. So
sure.
it's like You might even need to build 3 decks if that's the case. And then obviously with Rise, there's even more. So like, there's obviously a lot to cover, which is difficult. But in terms of just getting people to play the game, like starter decks are a great starting point. I'm gonna skip around a little bit, and we'll try and cover everything into its own situation. So let's go down to the uninkable from Rachel, which is, how do you stay on top of what tournaments and events are coming up? First and foremost, for us, we have a local Facebook. We've invited all of the local game stores from our local area to the Facebook so they can, plant their tournaments on there. We have like a pin post with all of like the local league plays and things like that. And then past that, we have the Discord that if you're not in, you can join. Links in the description below. And we have now an entire forum set up. Shout out to AJ this week. He was an absolute champ. He actually set up an entire forum with tags from whatever part of the world you're in, with literally the weeks and then the dates that they're in. You can just click, hey, if I'm in Northeast United States, I just click it and boom, it shows me like everything that's going on for the next 3-4 weeks. It's really, really great. If that's like what you're really trying to do, and like how that all comes to play is, I'm a moderator on the Facebook group, on the main Facebook group with 50,000 people. So like I see way more posts than I should. And normally anytime an event comes up, I just take it, screenshot it, and send it in, and then it's there. But I think the key tip here is join your local Facebook groups.
Totally.
If there isn't one, honestly, just make it.
Totally.
Just make one. Like, just literally go make a Facebook group, make it central to your area, ship it into the Disney Lorcana Facebook groups, and share it everywhere. Try and get players from your thing. Try and find out what stores are there. All that stuff. You can also make a local Discord. In all honesty, like if you're more of a Discord person, search Discord communities to see if there's a Discord. Like I know that there's Discords for like on the West Coast. They have like a Los Angeles Discord, they have a Seattle Discord. So like that might be an option as well if you're trying to find those types of things. But for me, it's just, we created that room so everybody had the ability to just, whenever they found something, they implemented it, we put it in, and now that it's even more organized, we can keep it even easier for people to find the information if they're not there right away. Anything else to add to that, Scott?
No, I mean, the thing I like best about Facebook in using this is if the stores or you make the tournament an event, and then people can like interest it or say they're going, you'll get notifications that like this event is coming up, or like, this is coming, XYZ person liked the fact that you were going to this event. So like you just get more notifications and reminders that the event is coming up. The only thing I'll add is you need to decide on a personal level, like what is your traveling distance? So for me personally, living in Philadelphia, like I'm willing to go to the outskirts of DC south to, I don't know, I guess like the New York, New Jersey border, like on a random Saturday. Like, I don't know that I will do it again, but we that's what I have done in chapter 1, for example.
Right.
So we invited everybody in my, like, because we moderate the Philadelphia group, like, and South Jersey group, like, hey, if this is the radius I'm willing to go, then it's probably what other people want to go. So anybody in that radius, feel free to join and post on the Philadelphia group. But
right, like it's called like Philadelphia, New Jersey, but like it's bigger than that.
Right. So like, is there a Baltimore one? I don't know. Is there a DC?
I know there's like a central Pennsylvania one.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, like it depends.
Yeah. So I would say like if after you join or start your local one, if you want exposure to more things, find those that are out there too. A lot of them honestly are just dumping grounds for events. So like it's not like you're gonna get spam with a ton of like other stuff. And depending on depending on how your moderators are strict or not, like we're pretty strict on ours of what can be posted there and what can't. You just won't get a bunch of spam. It's for its purpose, which is to find events and people to play with.
Okay, so the next question is from AJ. What is a good ratio of shift characters to their characters they're shifted onto?
It depends on how powerful both of those things are. Like, I'm gonna assume that all these cards are good. Like, let's assume the
Sure.
shift cards are. Let's assume the Floodborn shift versions are good because you wouldn't. I don't think you probably just wouldn't be playing the smaller ones unless they had more universal use. Like one of the ones I can think of, for example, is like the new Jafar. Like I think the
Okay.
3-2 Jafar will probably see more play in decks alone without the like shift one. But I mean, I think you'll end up playing both. But I think that like he's more universal to me than the snake is, for example. But in most cases, like you occasionally see like Stitch New Dog see play and you didn't see Rockstar, for
Right.
example. So let's
Right.
just assume that like the shifted version is what is where you want to go in this situation, and not just like a card is good because a card is good.
Right.
So assuming both are good, in my opinion, you should just be running like I've run 4 of each and it's not a problem. It depends on really what the cost is for what the benefit is of the shiftable character. So a lot of them cost like if they cost like between 4 and 6, I see no reason not to just run a full playset of them. But if they start to get really up there into like 7, 8, I don't think
Right.
there's any nines, like 7, 8, where
Nice.
like the shift cost is like 5, 6, etc., where it's expensive. I think 5 is probably the max. I don't know if there probably is yeah, Elsa's a 6.
Also,
Um,
yeah.
at that point, it becomes why are you playing the shifted character and how many of them do you want to run? And then how often do you really want to shift it? Like, I don't see Elsa shifted all that often. I even played the ability to do it and I still didn't
Right.
do it all that often.
Right. So like Aladdin and Elsa, the two
Yep.
prime examples where like neither of those cards really need it,
Hmm.
or not that it needed or didn't need it. It was more or less like through most of the metagame, they didn't even play it. Like we started with like the 3 cost Elsa early, but then it went away. And then by the end we were, Queen Regent was an option. But like Aladdin Street Rat, that didn't see a whole lot of play. Like
Right.
it was in and out. Like Prince Ali didn't see any play, let's be
Hmm.
honest.
Right.
So like those are prime examples of like, yeah, some of these cards just clearly don't need it because like they're good enough on their own. But then there's cards like Tinkerbell where like her getting into play early was important in a lot of matchups.
Hmm.
So like utilizing that. Now I think in Rise, I think it's actually very interesting because there's so many, right? Like
Yep.
since there's so many shiftable characters, I think it's just gonna come down to like, is this like a good card?
Totally.
And like, at the end of the day, Tiny Tactician was still a playable card. Tinkerbell most helpful, like still a good card. So it's like, like you don't mind playing these cards because they're just good. Whereas like if I'm like I'm all about Pinocchio, right? Like, do I really need to play the 2 cost uninkable Pinocchio just to shift onto with my other Pinocchio? Like, there's just a lot like that you have to like consider there when in deck building. And I think that ironically, I think it's going to be different per whatever Floodborn you're trying to play.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is that I don't see other than like Hercules that I've seen so far. Um, I really haven't seen a lot of like I don't want to run this character, but I have to because I have to shift onto him.
Yeah.
Like a lot of them are just like, I mean, I'm just a random 2/2 for one, like
Right.
or just a 3/2 with an ability, or I'm just
Right.
like, you know, unfortunately, I'm just like Cheshire Cat, like whatever, like
I'm just that
like.
better cat.
But otherwise, like to me, like both sides of the coin are playable. So like, it just comes down to like how important is it for you to shift out the larger version on curve as opposed to waiting or as opposed to like just dropping it off curve, for example,
Right. And like,
or on its regular curve, I guess you could say.
yeah. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Um let's see if there's any more non-rise. I think everything else is going to be rise oriented. Well, actually here's a good one. So, there's like a three questions in a row about restock versus reprint.
Okay.
So, this is like you just covered a video, like basically just covered this in a recent video, but not to the extent of like this far. So what is the key difference between restock and reprint, and what was the most recent wave that we just got?
So, from a term perspective, I think there were mistakes made.
Mhm.
Um, Somebody pointed out in the questions basically, hey, because they put that errata in there, obviously new cards had to be physically printed or else they wouldn't have that errata. So to call it just a restock and not a reprint is a little bit off, which I agree with. So originally, and there's articles out there that I found to back this up. There was supposed to be an October restock,
Right.
which was just literally like, the second wave of getting product.
Right.
So, but what I believe probably happened was that whatever was held back for that was set out the first time. So they literally had to reprint in order to meet the second wave of restock, if that makes sense.
Right.
But what was supposed to happen at the end, originally quarter one 2024,
Right.
moved to in the US, moved to holiday time, now moved to end of November, was a larger reprint.
Right.
Um which includes now both Rise and Chapter 1. So it's basically like more product being actually created.
Right.
The restock that was supposed to happen in October, which was pushed back until November, to me was more about filling the orders that they could not fill the first time around. What I
Right.
believe would probably happen is that they sold out of everything and had to wind up reprinting. So the terms are a little. I always call what just happened in November the restock,
Right.
even though again we agree there were cards that were printed differently.
Mm.
And then the end of year now, probably what in like 2 weeks at this point, there will be a reprint.
Right.
Is going to be the larger equivalent to like what people got, probably maybe even a combination of the first what just happened and the first time, because a lot of people wind up getting a decent amount like a week ago.
Yeah.
So to me, it's probably like a redo of that, and then also a redo of whatever happens to the Rise of the Floodborn, probably like a week or two later from the allocation they just got. I mean, and that's when it'll be printed. Obviously,
Right.
it takes time for stuff to get to like through a distributor model to the LGSs, etc.
Yeah. I think it's honestly fair for the confusion.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah.
Because like even like just going through and seeing all of it, it's just like, well, what is it?
Mhm,
And there just wasn't that defined uh those defined answers. And
mhm.
I think even in some of it, it's still confusing because you're just
Yeah.
like, did I get it? Is my befuddle new? Is my befuddle the same? I
Mhm.
don't know.
The other thing I'll say is I believe so the restock was LGS only. I believe, and I don't, I'm not positive. I believe the reprint at the end of the now November will probably include big box stores.
Right.
So you're
Yeah.
more likely to see. I mean, if you can find Rise of the Floodborn, you'll see also it's sitting next to some Chapter 1 product
Yeah, like we can
eventually.
I mean, probably,
Mhm,
right? Like I would be hopeful that that's true, but it,
mhm.
it, it just might not be.
Yeah.
Um so yeah, I don't know. I totally get the confusion though.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. I don't know why they use such generic terms for the phrasing, to be
Right.
honest with you.
All right, so let's get into the rise of the Floodborn specific questions here.
Sure.
Um all right, so my problem here was I had to do some stuff. Okay. So from Nanobiter, we had discard as a major theme for Emerald and Set 2. Will mid-range slash control decks be able to survive, or will they? Is it possible they adapt? If they adapt, what would that look like? Also, on the flip side, will Emerald discard decks be able to thrive with the smaller stat lines if the meta shifts into front-loaded, aggressive, and empty-handed decks? So obviously, there's two questions here. Like, A, will discard be good enough to stop mid-range and control themes, which I think like at the end of the day, we can kind of agree were the more dominating factors of chapter one.
Sure.
So like, is discard the answer to stopping that? Or is honestly in the same question, I don't even think it was realized that this was asked, but will discard be the answer, or does aggressive have enough to be the answer? And I think it's a two-part question, but it's very difficult. So first and foremost, let's start out with discard. Like, do we think discard, although it has a lot of stake in rise, do you think that it has the potential to be, a staying force in like the next meta game?
I think some of the individual cards do, but not as a deck.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the deck itself just has diminishing returns once your opponent is low or out of cards. The game's like if you continue to draw like bad discard cards, like that don't do anything other than discard your opponent's cards, like it's not going to you're not going to be able to close the game out fast enough to take advantage of your opponent not having any cards in hand. So you need a lot to go right. Like you need your win conditions to be drawn in the right order or be in play in the right order. It has a ton of uninkables as well.
Mm-hmm.
So like you need a lot of things to go right. If you're telling me like should you just play some cards that basically take advantage of like that are splashing and like you know uh use discard as a side theme to just be basically a good card, I would say yes. And that's the way that I saw it being used most effectively in chapter one with You Have Forgotten Me is basically like, I mean, I never played a full play set of them, but like usually like if you drew one and your opponent had two cards in hand, you just took their whole hand.
Mm-hmm.
Your opponent could play around if you had more of them. The problem in this game, which isn't the same in other games, is the card draw is more cost efficient, more consistent,
Right.
um, builds towards your win condition in the case of like a lot of the stitches and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. Like you're still adding to the board at the same time that you're drawing cards.
Right.
Or that it's free like friends, like the tempo, the cost, the
Yeah.
ability to add to
Or
the board is just better.
or it's on a character that
Right.
heals and draws. Like,
Right. Right.
there's
Right.
just enough of it.
Right.
Uh,
So
yeah. Right. Go ahead.
so I mean, is there a sub theme of it, and can you add it to an existing deck? Yes. Should you build around it, and is it going to be some meta terror? Like, not in my opinion.
The problem is that with majority of the cards, they're very rare that you're getting a 2-for-1 trade out of the deal.
Sure.
So like, yes, you're making them discard, but you're also playing a card to make them discard, and then
Mhm.
most of them don't stay in play.
Mhm.
So like, because of all those things, since they don't stay in play, you can't advance the game state. So if you can't
Mhm.
advance the game state, then like you're kind of both playing off the top anyway. So it's like, what is your theme actually achieving? Now, granted, I know this week we've had Flynn Rider that came out that is like a
Sure.
quote payoff and things like that, but I still believe that you can probably get to your goal in the game without playing 3 or 4 or 5 different discard cards. Like, you just want to play the best ones and then make that flow with the rest of your deck.
Agreed.
What about aggressive strategies?
I mean, hopefully there's more of that coming out. I believe that if they can splash the disruption of the discard, that'll only help their situation. I mean, essentially, most control strategies need to hit certain higher levels of ink than an aggro deck does. So if you think about like an aggro deck, like an emerald aggro deck, for example, or even like an amber one or amethyst, like topping off at like 5 ink, let's say, um, the control strategies to combat that usually need to go to 6 or 7. So if you want to use disruption elements in addition to the aggro, I think that's totally fine. And you can get away with sometimes making those plays that a dedicated disruption deck wouldn't be able to make. So, um, I mean, we have seen some large lore numbers on cards in this set, larger than in chapter one, for example,
Yeah.
on both mid range cards and aggro cards.
Yeah.
So I do think that like they there's room for them to improve as well. I mean, there's not I don't remember seeing another 2 lore for 1, but you are seeing more resilient 2 lore for 2s. You're seeing 3 lore for as low as 4 or 5. So you will see more, even as low as 2 on that
Right.
Pinocchio, for
There's
example.
several
So
cards for 2 now. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think I do think there's definitely room for aggro to play some disruption elements and it'll help them out.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those where I think it's specifically like Amber Amethyst just has
Mhm.
like it's like literally just like infinite by turn 4. I have 2, 3, 4 lore characters.
Yeah.
Like just here I go, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
But the
Mhm.
cost of that is the amount of uninkables.
Sure.
So
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to see if that deck can find a way to just go, in
Mhm.
all honesty. But I don't know. We'll have to see. Let's move on. So, what new color combos or play styles are you looking forward to playtesting after the Rise of the Floodborn release? And we'll ask again in a few weeks. But so right now, there's like 50-ish cards that's left to be released at the time of recording this. So, what's like let's put it this way. Very soon on the channel, probably like days after seeing this, we're going to have another core video and help people out with all of these things in all honesty. But let's just pick one each. So like what is your current like I can't wait to play this deck, Scott?
To me, it's using a lot of the new Sapphire cards that are like value engines and seeing how they do in like a control type shell.
Mhm,
Um, so it's shifting from like Ruby Amethyst maybe to like Ruby Sapphire as a control strategy.
mhm,
And seeing how that works. It's kind of the theme for me throughout the entire Rise of the Floodborn will be like synergy versus just using like good cards, which it always has been. So it's going to be like whether or not whether there's synergy there and whether or not like just some of the individual good cards there can be played, and that theme can continue for me.
Yeah. I know I said this, in the 10 cards video. I really like Shirkan. I really like what he can do. I'm very interested in what other inks Ruby can finally find a home in because, like, aside from the occasional Emerald deck and like the small success that Amber had with Ruby, like it just didn't see a whole lot of play as
Mhm.
an ink. But I think that card is a kind of a niche pin to it, and I think it'll be really good to see if we can utilize that card moving forward to kind of just broaden out other inks with it. And honestly, maybe it is just good with Amethyst again. Like maybe that's just like a natural point in the game that we're gonna keep coming back to. Who knows? But all in all, I think for me, starting out with Ruby, seeing if Ruby Steel can come out on top, seeing if, like you said, Ruby Sapphire has the ability to kind of adapt. Like that's where I would like to start. I definitely am very interested in several of the Ruby cards. Like Dinner Bell. Like, is that
Yep.
card actually
Mhm.
good enough? Is it what it needed to make like a Ruby Sapphire or a Ruby Steel? Like, is that just another key component of that deck of like being able to get your hand back, things like that? I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at to start. For more though, if you're watching this now, there'll be a video linked in the description
Yeah.
with lots of options. I promise.
Mhm.
um. Okay, so let's talk financials. We actually missed this one, but we'll do a compound. So early on, right now, we probably have a limited amount of players or a limited amount of sellers with pre-releases for Rise.
Oh yeah, total. Not hardly any at all.
Right. So it's not very many. So like, what is the what is your initial thoughts on the pre-order prices for Rise that you've seen so far?
I mean, they're obviously insanely high. I don't look at pre-order prices as starting amounts. If you were to literally take any card and look at its chart as to like
Mhm.
what it's sold for, if the chart goes, and it still should, if you go back before launch, you literally see a cliff fall
Yeah.
because the pre-order price is so much higher than what the card eventually went for when it existed.
Right.
Pre-order prices are pretty much just trying to get somebody to click yes. There's really like there's no stock in that price whatsoever. So I tend to look at pre-order prices and just try to compare them across rarities.
Yeah.
So I say like, and to be honest with you, I don't know if people know this or not, but like the qualifications to be able to even do pre-orders on TCG Player means you have to physically have a game store
Right.
with an address.
Which is
And the I
which
mean,
is
I don't think
interesting. It's interesting to note because like Ravensburger's rules in chapter 1 were that you couldn't even
right,
pre-order cards legally if like as a game store. So
right,
that in itself is a sketchy kind of type thing.
right, right. So, and I think you need to be a level 4 seller. I
Yeah.
don't know if you were a game store. I don't know how you wouldn't be a level 4 seller, but
Right.
um, if you had to physically have you have to physically have a game store with an address, etc. So the number of even options in the wild to even meet these criteria is low.
Yeah.
Compared like because most LGSs are not going to have the stock that they can guarantee any kind of pre-sales for anyway. They're usually going to sell it to their own players, etc. So like it's sketchy to begin with, like
Right.
what's even going on with pre-orders to begin with. So I would say honestly, a lot of the players that are out there, or a lot of the stores at that point that are out there that are pre-selling, are probably not authorities on Lorcana itself. Um, so like you'll see, for example, like that legendary bell is like going for like $100 pre-sale, let's just say, but yet the legendary like Sisu, who I find to be probably a better card in my opinion, is going for like 60. So
Sure.
like I try to use that comparison is to me is more valuable than what the literal number is $100, $60, whatever. So somebody thinks Sisu is 60% value of whatever they already think the highest legendary was. And at the time, there's only like 4 or 5 legendaries that were out there.
Sure.
So day one, when like actual prices start, they tend to mimic at least that ratio what happened in the beginning. So I would say in the beginning, you're like, okay, I open all my product and I'm a seller. Like, okay, I have bells and I have Sisus. I should sell my bells at X and my Sisus at 60% of X.
Right.
That's what I use it for. Um, but to be honest with you, there's not a lot of like if you're dealing with a pre-seller that doesn't understand the game very well, it's not always going to work out that way. For example, like the rares are pretty much all the same price, and that obviously isn't going to happen.
Right.
So, like, they're basically like, okay, if I can get $20 for any one of these, I'll take it, as
Right.
opposed to here's the variety that's going to happen. And we already know that, like, even now there's certain rares that go all the way up here, and there's certain that are all the way at the bottom, and there's more at the top than there are at the bottom. But there's, obviously it falls off a cliff, and then you just hit the pile of unplayable rares, basically.
Right. Right.
Um, so I think that situation is going to happen again. But I really look at pre-sales as a ratio more than anything else.
Yeah, and the key note where if no one's paying attention, don't pre-order anything on
Right.
TCG Player. Like I'm just don't like literally like to me it's even worse because some of these things have been up for weeks and I've talked to respected people that would give me the information and they're still like, "Hey, I still don't know how many boxes I'm getting." So it's
Right.
like these people that have had stuff pre-registered for weeks, you can't even rely you're going to get your cards for weeks.
Mhm.
Like there's like what like it's almost a 30-day window, right,
Oh,
for
yeah. Yeah,
shipping
yeah.
cards out.
Yeah.
So that means like whoever's pre-selling all this crap, they still have to get all this stuff to fill these orders.
Mhm.
And let's say you do need cards for like next week or even PAX Unplugged. I would not for 1 second rely that just because those people have it listed means that you're going to get it in that time frame. Like
Totally agree. Yeah.
just don't pre-order. That's the key takeaway
Yeah,
here.
yeah. Yeah.
um so what about the price drop in chapter 1? What about like is this kind of as expected for us or was it just more of like a I didn't think it would take this much of a dip. Where do we think we're gonna go? And I know we're gonna have a full finance video like this on normal, but like right here, right now, like what's your like initial response?
It's certainly as expected. I think it's more drastic because I think that the resellers that are small time saw the profits they made in August and September with Lorcana and said, if there's an opportunity for me to get any more product, sell it to me. And so you actually probably didn't have as many new collectors or players be able to get as much stock as they wanted.
Right.
So I mean, a lot of stores smartly like limited you on what you could get. Like we could
Right.
only get one box each, for example, on our restock. But you know, if even if that was the case where they limited how much you could get, like the reseller got just as much as the new player,
Right.
and they're like, okay, I need to make my profit again. But it's the same people that like, yes, are they making as much profit as they made last time? No, but they still want to make it, so they're willing to do that race to the bottom against other people that are basically in the same situation. So, in my opinion, like that's the reason why it fell off so much. There's obviously more supply. The boxes you're getting them a lot cheaper out there. There's a lot more people literally just selling the boxes too.
Not around us.
Yeah. But if you go on TCG Player, like you can get a box, I think for like just over 200 or something like that now.
Right. Well, I know it did, but it started to go back
Yeah.
up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just supply and demand thing. Like
Yeah.
people will buy them at the low because the certain areas like ours, like I mean, I know some of our. I think I saw this morning, like some LGS by us was still selling them at $10 a pack, and still
Yeah.
like so a box is like.
Yeah,
I think
there's
I think they said a box was $230. I'm like, wow, save that one pack price. Thanks so much.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Literally.
So I mean, like, so I think we're at a point now where resellers were able to get as much supply back into their supplies equal to whatever players got. And I don't know. I think some players are still gun shy about if they haven't gotten in yet because they got a box. Like it's still not enough until there's a massive flood, for lack of a better term. No pun intended. That'll probably come at the end of the month.
Sure.
Of additional product coming in. So I do believe that we are in a low because the people that were able to get it, a lot of them still being resellers, just want to make the money back. And Rise is coming out in like a week.
Yeah.
So like
Well,
anybody
less
that
than a week from recording right
yeah,
now.
anybody that's churning needs to make that money back or else they can't afford Rise.
Right.
So I mean, uh, I don't want to. I haven't looked to see exactly like the ratio of non-gold star sellers to gold star sellers or like what somebody's total sales are, but I would imagine that the prices being completely driven lower are by low number of sale non-gold star sellers trying to make the money back to have money on hand for when Rise comes out in a week.
Fair enough. All right. So moving on, we have thoughts on Chapter 1 staples that may see a drastic increase or decrease in play as Rise is coming out. So we did kind of a whole video on like cards that will excel or get better in like the evergreen aspects of it. But now that we've seen more of the set, is there any like standout cards that you're like, yep, this card is definitely just gonna go up in value? I mean, like for me to start, it's Ariel. I mean, there's just like so many more songs, and like most of them are playable. So like now instead of just playing Ariel in like the one shell, like you're probably gonna find a good excuse for it to play it in multiple shells, just because like even for us, like we're big fans of Ariel, but we didn't play Ariel in our Amber Ruby decks.
Correct.
But now it's like, well, like there's like 2 or 3 good Ruby songs. There's like 2 or 3 good Amber songs. It's like, yeah, I may as well just play this card now because she probably reads draw a card. Like that's great. But like, what else might stand out to you?
I would say it's hard for me to pinpoint cards that will improve.
Right.
But to me, the biggest area of decrease is going to be your uninkable decision.
Yeah.
So, depending on the uninkables you were running in your deck the first time, they're usually probably the ones that are going to be replaced most often because there's only so many of them that you can afford to run. So some of the numbers of things like your Lilos or your, or your like your Hades or your maybe not so much like your big finishers, but depending on the way that your deck's going to slant will be a lot of those. Your uninkable decisions when it comes to those.
Like Ursula, Elsa, like those cards, likely still good, right? Like,
well, yeah.
So it's like, it depends.
A decision point.
Depends on like, but it's like you said, like, I mean, Amethyst in general feels like it got a million uninkables. Emerald got a million uninkables.
Yep.
So like, let's just use Cusco, right? So Cusco has been probably the best Emerald card of set 1.
Sure.
But now there are several 5-cost Emerald cards with 3 lore.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's even some with below that with their conditional, but like it still exists. So Does a card like Cusco still like is that still like your go-to 5-cost uninkable in Emerald? Like, or you think that card actually might go down in play?
It may go down in play because I think if you want to run one of the ones that has a specific purpose, like a bell or something like that, then you have to cut somewhere. And because she's uninkable, you might have to cut the Cusco. So like if you're running like purposefully like a bell into John Silver, you have to swing your guy into my bell type of situation. Like, that's one situation. If you want to run the Flynn and you're running like a super heavy dedicated discard deck, again, there's your situation. So
Right.
it's gonna be a decision of whether or not like if it's your payoff or not. I mean, he's still universally good with the ward, but that's a really good example of like an uninkable decision that you're going to have to make.
Yeah.
The other one I look at is like be prepared and that scar.
Sure.
Like on face value, when that scar was first revealed, you're like, I'm never going to run this over. Be prepared, and then you have like Shere Khan, and you have like cards that like you have Dinner Bell, you have the song that you have to damage a character to damage another character. Like you just have more combinations that key off of having characters as opposed to actions. So but now you're looking at I have multiple 7-cost uninkables in my deck. How many of these can I actually run?
Sure.
And to be honest with you, there isn't that much universal card draw that we've seen either. There's a lot of conditional card draw, but there isn't anything that's universal. So it may be hard to make up for uninkable counts, etc. So
okay. One last one. Hot takes for the start of Rise.
I think the synergy between like when you play a Floodborn will be very important early on. And may carry weight throughout the entire chapter. I think those cards are being kind of undervalued right now because people just aren't. People are only seeing the value. They're not ascribing the value to having one of those early. I don't even know if you want to call it a payoff or like whatever in play already when you play the Floodborn.
They're kind of just like engines, right? Like I guess that's what you like. These are just like the engine for the process,
Yeah.
So okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I think there's gonna be like there's some really hyped things right now. And like there's some really hyped characters, and I think there's gonna be a whole lot of do too much. We talked about it with the discard, but honestly, like we could go to the extent of healing. Like there's a lot of cards that work off healing now. There's a lot of cards that work off like the Christopher Robin aspect of like untapping, like all of those engines. I think like the very early iterations of this can be like, oh my god, I got to play every single card that reads if you heal, do something.
Yep, I agree.
That's gonna be bad. Like those decks aren't gonna work. Like they're not gonna work. Like honestly, like there are already videos out there of players doing it. Like do the research, go and find them. Like those decks aren't already good. So like there's gonna be a lot of that. And I think the same thing about discard. I think the same thing about untapping. Like there's gonna be a happy meeting of just understanding like, hey, these cards are just good. So let's play them, and then we'll work in the rest of it that's necessary. But I do not need magic flower, gumbo pot, coconuts. Like I don't need like literally every card that reads heal my guy. Like
that's a good point.
Throw it out the window.
Especially when there's like a better one now anyway with that whatever that's called, that popsicle or whatever.
Scott, I've been really busy the last couple days. I don't even know if I read that card.
Just run that one. That's the one that's good.
The point is that there's too much of it. So
just run that one.
Right. So with that, if you enjoyed this, if you want to be a part of the questions, Scott and I do this normally every episode. Links in the description below for the Discord. Get on in the Discord, hit the questions for the podcast section, and we will catch you guys in the next video.
Thanks.
See ya.